Dan Walco was going to be here tonight, but he isn't here, so I phoned my friend Glenn Kelleway.
Thank you,
And
David.
I say friend because I never mind talking about embarrassing moments in my life. And in 2002, August the 13th, 2002, I was put into receivership by Revenue Canada. I am, so far as I know, the only person ever put into bankruptcy by the CRA. And I have since had other information that tells me why and how it happened. I'm not going to bother publicizing it because I can't prove it. But I then had it was a $5 million bankruptcy, and I got my discharge, and then my wife rode away, and that's silly to say. She rode it. It's so romantic. She rode away on the back of a Harley with a fellow fixing the sun deck. So then I had a divorce, and it was a $1 million divorce after a $5 million bankruptcy. And then you'll agree that when people talk to you about their $1 million divorce, it's usually a sad thing. But my $1 million divorce was great because since I was bankrupt and I'd put everything in my wife's name to avoid creditors and avoid the bankruptcy, when we went to court, I ended up getting back. I got my house back, my car back, my motorhome back, my sailboat back. It was like a country record played backwards. And so my $1 million divorce after the $5 million bankruptcy meant that I got $500,000 worth of stuff back. But see, it sounds, when you tell what happened, it sounds better than when you say it, right?
Yeah.
So I needed a $500,000 mortgage to put on this house that we're in, and I will have lived in this house for 40 years as of December the 10th, another 3 weeks. And I didn't think for a second that I would have trouble because the house was valued at $800,000. I wanted $500,000. And I got a lady that was, I considered, a really good mortgage broker. She'd gotten mortgages for people that couldn't get mortgages. She could not find a mortgage for me anywhere. They were not to be found. She did come up with a private lender who wanted 10% when interest rates were 4%, and they wanted a $10,000 bonus for a one-year mortgage. I was about to sign that, and Glenn came along, and he just entered the mortgage business.
I've been in for a few years at that time.
Well, no more. 2005? No more than 2.
7 years now, going on 8.
Well,
so 2002, yeah, 3 years.
Yeah, you were just a couple of years, 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
And likely the greenest guy I knew in the mortgage brokerage business. And you phoned me because I think your mother had told you to phone me or told you that I needed a mortgage.
Probably.
His mother is just a wonderful lady.
She's a matriarch too, but
she's the boss.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah. And she'd phoned, or she'd been in, and I told her I was having trouble, and she got Len to phone me. And he asked for permission to shop it around, even though I told him it was impossible. And he shopped it around, and you found me a mortgage.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
At great terms.
Yep.
And I then ended up, a couple of years later, with the mortgage tax deductible, which is what I wanted to do. And Glenn has also followed along in this part of mortgage and made a study of how to make a mortgage tax deductible. Yeah. And that's why I said, come on in, we'll talk tonight, because we're going to talk about making a mortgage deductible. So my introduction is, he got me a mortgage, and I was actually a licensed mortgage broker for years, you know that.
Yes.
I mean, I'm a graduate of urban land economics, and I was one of the first people to actually graduate in the mortgage brokerage part of urban land economics for the province of British Columbia. So I got sandbagged because no bank, trust company, or credit union was like they'd all changed the rules and they weren't going to give anybody a mortgage that had just gone bankrupt. Is it still that hard now, or have they reduced that just a bit?
Well, in light of the changes after October of last year, 2008, when we moved into this, what we call an economic meltdown, and they pumped trillions of dollars in to try and turn things around, things have gotten actually worse in terms of trying to get financing. And let's just say approaching last year, when you went, hadn't gone up in a run-up. People weren't throwing money out.
No.
It was probably a little bit easier than it would be today, but certainly tougher than, say, beginning of last year through about mid last year, 2008. So, because in 2008 we started to see the first parts of the economic meltdown, and in doing that, what happened at about October is the Bank of Canada, or the federal government, changed the lending policies in Canada, decreasing, getting away with 40-year amortizations. They got away with mortgages that were 100%, and they left the cashback mortgages, or what we call the lender's incentive mortgages, where you borrow those. But they took away a bunch of that to toughen things up. So today, if you were to look at things compared to somewhere beginning of last year, they're tougher than when you went. But what I did was I looked around, and I had already placed one mortgage with the specific institution you ended up with.
Well, it was Greater Vancouver Community Credit Union. I'll give them all the credit in the world.
And I had a reasonably good relationship with the underwriter, and I knew the manager, because I track everything in my system, and I've got probably 16,000 records in my system with contacts, names, and numbers. A lot of that needs to be updated, but you know, as I said to one of the notaries earlier today, I was talking to him, and I said, well, my first correspondence was due with 2004. I named the time, date. I named which one of my employees had spoken to him. I said, name one of the mortgage brokers, about 2,000 in this province, not including the bank reps and the roving sales forces for the banks, that can tell you that. And there's probably only about 10 or 15 in this province that could track that with that detail. So I followed up, and I was fairly soon. I tried about 2 or 3 lenders and pitched the deal, and had to go back. I had to push it a couple of times. Part of that was your existing relationship with that person. I think that's what pulled it from a possible deal to a deal that they were willing to look at. And when that looked at, and you know the manager there, as you've alluded in other public events.
I didn't know Richard at that. I didn't know him to know him. But I'd had peripheral relations with him. But Glenn, I had had dinner with the presidents of every bank in Canada at one time or another. I'd been speaking. I taught for the Canadian Bank Association.
Yeah.
I taught the mutual fund course for the Royal Bank, the TD Bank, the Bank of Commerce, the Bank of Nova Scotia. The only one I didn't do was the Bank of Montreal.
Okay.
I did the credit unions
back
in '87 when they all suddenly had to get licensed to sell mutual funds in the banks. Anyway, I was really disgusted with the system when I couldn't get a $500,000 mortgage on a house that was valued at $850,000.
Yep.
And I should have been able to get it just because of the equity.
That is the thought, and the fact that there was an understandable reason as to why your bankruptcy occurred.
Well, the bankruptcy was, I didn't go bankrupt.
No.
I made all my payments for years. I was just fighting a $4 million bill with the tax office.
Yeah. The unfortunate part is most of the lenders, and even more so now, they have a box of rules that they operate in, and you have to know which lenders has a box and what parts of the box will cover the client's set of circumstances. And each lender has a slightly different shaped box. It's not square for all of them, and it's not the exact same size, and it sits, if you imagine all of the rules being laid out on a table, and you kind of fit this box over the top. You kind of move it over here for one, over here for others, stretch the sides out, and you find, and in addition to that, you also know that either your underwriter or the manager of a given institution has some latitude to do things. Ultimately, I tell my clients, though, oftentimes I said, you know what, to get that deal done, someone has to put their neck, excuse the expression, on the blood-stained block, the chopping block, and tell the axeman not to cut. And that's where it requires someone with decision-making power to do that. In your situation, we had to go to a smaller institution where they had established
where a local guy could make the decision instead of somebody in Toronto.
Toronto, exactly.
Okay.
Calgary or wherever else.
So we're making my point.